Not long later, Alexander and his army strode onto the Gaugamela plain in battle-ready formation. Finally, the Macedonian king and his Persian counterpart were face to face once more, and the great battle for Asia was about to begin. But this clash was not to be the walkover the Macedonians might have expected after their winter of luxury. Darius's army was so massive that its flanks extended beyond Alexander's by a significant margin, and outflanking was virtually assured. The Persian left and right wings were commanded by Bessus and Mazaeus respectively, while the great king Darius III himself was stationed in the center. All in all, the Persian army at Gaugamela consisted of between 100,000 and 150,000 troops, 30 to 40,000 of which were cavalry. Alexander's army of around 40,000 infantry and 7,000 cavalry opposed this gargantuan force. On the surface, its units were drawn up as they usually were. Phalanx battalions made the solid center. Parmenion and his allied Thessalian cavalry stood guard on the left, while Alexander, the companion cavalry, and the king's usual Agrianes, archer and Hypaspist strike force prepared to smash the enemy army on the right. But there were a few notable differences designed by the king for precisely this occasion. Both the Macedonian left and right flank guards were angled inward in order to better withstand a Persian encirclement attack. The second line of 7,000 Greek hoplite infantry was also arrayed behind the first Macedonian line, with orders to turn and face any attempt at encirclement by the enemy. Hopefully, twisting the flanks as he had and deploying such a reserve would hold the Achaemenid cavalry off until the battle was won. Confident in his army's supreme discipline and fully prepared to exploit Darius's plan, Alexander ordered his entire line to gradually shift to the right. Simultaneously, the king personally took his right wing and began an oblique advance, as though aiming to outflank the Persian line with his numerically inferior forces. At once reacting to this unexpected maneuver, Bessus flexed his strength by stretching his cavalry even further out, always keeping outside of the Macedonians. This in turn dragged units away from the Persian center. All of a sudden, it became obvious to the Achaemenid leadership that by edging his army to the right, Alexander was attempting to move the battle away from the leveled plain, therefore rendering much of Darius's long-planned strategy null and void. Regardless of his lacking numbers, Alexander continued drifting right until he was just short of the cleared zone. Anxious to avoid fighting on the rough ground, Bessus finally committed his wing by launching a direct charge against the Macedonian right. This commitment was precisely the move Alexander had been attempting to provoke. As his companion cavalry joined battle with the ferocious Sacae-Bactrian horse that formed Bessus's vanguard, the Macedonian king fed additional units into the fray from deeper on his flank. Naturally, Bessus responded by committing the majority of his strength with the hope of crushing Alexander and rolling up his army. As this engagement was progressing on the Macedonian right, Darius III believed that the moment had come to wipe out this troublesome invader from the west once and for all. On the other Persian flank, Mazaeus launched an overwhelming cavalry assault against the ever-stalwart Parmenion, who was, as always, desperately outnumbered. All across the line, Persian scythed chariots, 200 of them, barreled forwards in an all-out rush to smash the Macedonian phalanx. Exercising the lockstep discipline for which they were known, Alexander's phalanx battalions refused to be intimidated by these contraptions. Instead, they simply opened lanes within their ranks, into which these horse-drawn chariots sped impotently. A few casualties were inflicted by the chariots here and there, but an effective combination of Agriani javellineering, royal guard, and army grooms put an end to Darius's wildcard, ripping the drivers from their vehicles and killing them. On Alexander's right, the clash between the companion cavalry and Bessus's horse intensified still further. For the Macedonians, it was a ferocious battle against the odds, with Peter Green stating that Alexander's 1,100-strong spearmen were fighting a force 10 times its own size. Still more Persian cavalry units from the center entered the fray, attempting to dislodge these brilliant Macedonian warriors. It was then that Alexander saw his great opportunity. The singular focus on Bessus's engagement with Alexander had revealed a dangerous weakness in the Persian left center, precisely where Darius himself was positioned. The line had been frayed, and many units that would otherwise have been protecting the great king were now absent, committed to fighting against the companions. Now, leading a spearhead of his companions, hypaspists, and several unengaged phalanx units, Alexander charged Darius directly. With the raising of a great battle cry, the Macedonian king's wedge mercilessly cut into the formations surrounding his Persian counterpart. Fighting was brutal and hand-to-hand. Macedonian cavalry spears thrust forward into the faces of the Persians. With the help of the phalangites, Alexander scythed his way closer and closer to Darius. The Persian king, who had grown increasingly uneasy ever since the battle began, is said by Curtius to have drawn his sword and prepared to defend himself. However, even with the fate of his centuries-old empire on the line, Darius's skittish nature once more got the best of him. Faced by the rampaging elites of the Macedonian army, the King of Kings turned tail and ran for his life. Witnessing the royal flight, the majority of the Persian center collapsed. This was followed by Bessus's left, which gradually began disengaging in good order. The time was now for Alexander to seize Darius and with him the crown of the Achaemenid Empire, and so the chase began. However, before the bold and triumphant king of Macedonia could ride to claim his imperial prize, an urgent message arrived from Parmenion. The situation in the rear was critical. Unaware that their monarch had been driven off the field, Musaeus and his overwhelming cavalry wing was on the verge of snatching victory from the jaws of defeat. Moreover, a stray band of Persian and Indian cavalry had drifted through a gap in the Macedonian phalanx and were ransacking the camp. Almost certainly gritting his teeth in frustration, Alexander looked back to where his loyal general required his urgent assistance, and forth where Darius was distancing himself with every passing second. After that second of hesitation, Alexander turned his troops around and charged the inner rear of the cavalry bearing down on Parmenion.